Bonsoir. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Catherine Spencer-Ross, and I'm president of Heritage Ottawa and chair of its lecture series committee. Before I continue, I'd like to acknowledge that Ottawa is at the heart of a vast homeland whose history reaches back long before the development of the National Capital Region, as we will see it this evening. For hundreds of years, Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples have been pressing for their Indigenous rights to be respected and their history to be understood. Heritage Ottawa makes efforts through our programs and partnerships to bring awareness to Algonquin history and heritage with events and planning. This lecture is made possible thanks to the generous support of our leadership sponsor, Sandy Smallwood and Andrex Holdings, and Merkley Supply Limited. We're also grateful for grants from the City of Ottawa and the Province of Ontario. I'd like to thank our members and donors. Your support is vital to our sustainability as an organization and allows us to present programming such as this free lecture and to advocate for the preservation of our historic resources. If you would like to join Heritage Ottawa or make a financial contribution, it's easy. Simply visit our website at heritageottawa.org for details. As you know, in 2026, Ottawa is marking the bicentennial of the city, which has evolved in this place over the last 200 years. Throughout the year, Heritage Ottawa will continue to highlight different aspects of the city's growth, from early Bytown to the present, through the examination of buildings and landscapes. I hope you've been following our weekly bicentennial bites on various social media platforms. Unusually, this month, Heritage Ottawa is presenting two related lectures as part of our special bicentennial celebrations. Last week, we saw images of a remote, muddy site, which, through various twists, turns, and connivances, became Canada's capital. If you missed it, you can find it on the Heritage Ottawa YouTube channel or via a link in our website. This evening, we'll learn about honoring that past to create tomorrow's heritage. At the end of tonight's presentation, our speaker has agreed to respond to questions. Andrew Waldron, architectural historian, author, and researcher, will moderate your questions. It is now my privilege to introduce our speaker for this evening. Toon Dreessen is a graduate of Carleton University. He's a certified lead accredited professional and a member of the American Institute of Architects and was inducted into the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada College of Fellows in 2016. Toon was awarded the Order of DaVinci in 2020. He leads Architects DCA in project development and is responsible for award-winning projects in infill development, as well as laboratory research and industrial and high-profile projects. Architects DCA is a company with roots dating back more than 40 years and is ISO 9001 certified. Toon leads his company's activism in the role of the built environment in social justice, gender equity, and fiscal responsibility, and the role of architects in a strategic, visionary, and thoughtful planning role for infrastructure investments. Beyond his company, Toon served 6 years on committees of the Ontario Association of Architects before joining its council, where he served for 6 years, 2 as president. He continues to serve on various committees and boards and is chair of the Ottawa Architecture Foundation, which he established in 2024. Toon is a recognized public speaker and published author in local and national media. He's been featured on CBC Radio, the Globe and Mail, Ottawa Citizen, and other news publications. I'm delighted now to turn the floor over to Toon.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here. So it is a real pleasure to be here, and I'm really honored to follow in David's footsteps from last week. So as mentioned, I'm past president, public speaker, advocate, and champion for architecture and architecture policy and the role architects can play in society in creating an equitable and socially just society. Last week, we heard from Dr. David Gordon and talked about the years of how we got here and the history and the 200 years of the past. Of necessity, a lot of that discussion, a lot of the history of our city has been driven by federal investment. Ottawa was established and it grew out of its role as a lumber town to become the federal capital, the capital city we are today, through that federal investment. And that thriving place that we are today, thriving place of 1 million or more people, has many people who have little or nothing to do with the federal government in various jobs, roles, suburbs. There are lots of people who aren't closely connected to federal government, and yet their day-to-day lives are tied to decisions made by federal government and federal funding. To take inspiration from the talking heads in the last slide, things are still very much the same. It's still the same kind of idea, the same kind of places. We still have the same kind of challenges. We may know how we got here. We also know that sentiments like this secret memo that David shared last week are still true. Ottawa might no longer be a wild place relative to other cities, and it might not be the least objectionable city, but we still sort of have a bit of an inferiority complex when it comes to our own placemaking. We don't seem to want to be bold, to stand out. We don't seem to want to be different. As David Moscrop wrote this week, we also have a tendency to be cheapskates. While his column focused on 24 Sussex and federal funding and federal spending, this is also very much true of Ottawa as a city. As a city, we can't seem to meet our objectives and become the city we aspire to be because some of those things take money and they take time and they take effort and they're sometimes difficult to do, but they're the things that are necessary to make a city that is a lasting place. What we build matters. This famous quote from Winston Churchill was made in the context of the replacement and the rebuilding of the British House of Parliament from the Second World War after it was bombed, and it's still very true. It's imagine today, knowing that we were going to be relocating the House of Commons for major renovations, if instead of the beautiful work that was done for creating a temporary House of Commons in the West Block, imagine if we just said, well, let's rent a hotel ballroom, we'll rent some conference room space, and shrug and say, oh, that'll do, that'll be close enough. We wouldn't be giving the importance to the sense of space, the sense of building that these important places need to be, and it wouldn't reflect who we are and how we present ourselves and how we make important decisions about our world and our place in the world. Did past generations set out to plan, design, build, or maintain a property in hopes that someday in 2026 we would cherish it? Probably not. Schools like the old abandoned school that of which there's just a few walls remaining at Cumberland and Murray, the old Board of Education building at 330 Gilmore. These weren't created with the intention that they would last for hundreds of years and create lasting memories. They were built because they were expected to be durable, and we cherish them because they are all that's left. Because they have attributes that make them special. They have historical value. They belong to a community or to a neighborhood. And so what we need to do today in 2026 is start asking ourselves how we go about creating the conditions that make what we build today something that future generations will consider worthy of preservation or respect. Is what we're building today unique in character or physical value? Is it being created for a unique or special purpose that will be cherished by future generations so that it will become something that is, heritage worthy in the years ahead? When we think of Ottawa, when people think of Ottawa, we tend to think of Ottawa as Ottawa, the capital. The images that come to mind when you mention Ottawa to somebody are the Parliament buildings, the Senate, these grand historical federal buildings. And these are the images that tourists take pictures of, and they take pictures of them, and they share them, and they talk about them. And these are all important things. But there is more to our city than just the federal government. And I'm hoping in this talk to actually not talk too much about the federal government, because the federal government isn't the one defining our city. They're not the ones planning our transit system or the majority of our parks or our streets. They're not responsible for the bulk of our city. The city of Ottawa has a lot to be responsible for, and a lot that it should be proud of. Ottawa tourism is funded in part by the city and local hotels as well as other levels of government. And they offer this large database of images that somebody can use to market Ottawa to conference planners, to events organizers, to people planning events and things in Ottawa. And these are the images that are downloadable and shareable from the Ottawa Tourism website. And they're great images. They show Ottawa at its best in this impressive grid that we've created. It really shows Ottawa at its best. But if you take out everything that's federal, there isn't a lot left. Only about a third of the images that are available from Ottawa Tourism are non-federal places or buildings. So why is that? Why aren't we showing images of locally made places, locally made buildings, and things that we should be proud of? The Ottawa Art Gallery doesn't appear on any of these photos. Why aren't we proud of the Ottawa Art Gallery? We should be. And if we're not, we have to ask ourselves why. Why aren't we showcasing these things to tourists and travelers? If you think about something like the Remi Modern in Saskatoon, it made the list of New York Times list of best places in the world to visit. This is a selection from around the world of incredible places to visit. And in 2018, the Remi Modern in Humble, Saskatoon made that list. And we have, just no disrespect to Saskatoon, but if they can do that with their art gallery, why can't we do that with ours? It's clearly not about the talent because it was the same architects. So what is it that Saskatoon does that makes it make the list and Ottawa doesn't? And it's not just about money. It's not just about, donations, because those are solvable problems. It's a question of what we're prioritizing. And it's also what's beyond the sort of, traditional image of Ottawa as a core, as the federal buildings, the Peace Tower and Canal photo op. There are other images of Ottawa that we should share in all of its messy glory. We have suburbs, we have subdivisions, we have, sort of the ordinary city, if you will, that is, not visited by tourists, but it's part of our city. And this image that, a lot of mayors are proud to share, that show just this enormous geography of Ottawa being larger than Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver put together. That's something that we should own. We shouldn't just post these images during breakfast talks and laugh about it and say this is how many roads we have to plow and maintain. We should honor this. We should respect it, and we should acknowledge that we are a geographically enormous city that encompasses rural, urban, and suburban communities, and we should celebrate that in all of its messy glory. Ottawa was recently voted the most livable major city in Canada, and we came fourth in city rankings overall. And that's an amazing achievement for Ottawa. And it's worth noting why. What's pushed us into that ranking? Ottawa has been my home for decades now. It's where I've built my career. It's where my family is, where my kids and my grandkids are. And I would absolutely rank it as one of the best places to live, no doubt. But what is it that the city is doing to make it top that list? Well, if you dig deep into that article in the Globe and Mail, you find that it's not really the city that's doing that. It's actually thanks to the National Capital Commission. And that's what makes Ottawa really excellent and top that list. Whether it's the River House with its winter sauna, swimming in the Rideau Canal with MP Yasser Naqvi, the Westboro Beach Pavilion, the canal, Winterlude, Kawiki Point, and these other projects. These are all things that make the capital a really great city. They give us beautiful parks and places to hang out and beautiful places to create memories and have experiences. But besides the Ottawa tourism photos, this is all the work of the NCC. So what is the city doing to do that? We shouldn't just depend on the NCC to do the heavy lifting. Design awards are one way of showing how we might compare ourselves to other places. We shouldn't just be pursuing awards for the sake of awards, but awards themselves are a telling indicator. Buildings are juried and they are judged to meet high standards of excellence. And presumably these buildings stand the test of time and they set the stage for the buildings and places that future generations will honor. Since the 1980s, there have been Governor General's Awards in architecture every 2 years. Not a single municipal building in Ottawa has ever won an award. In fact, only 3 Governor General Awards have ever been granted in Ottawa for the Canadian Archives in 1999, the Canadian War Museum in 2008, and in 2012, the delegation of the Ismaili Imamat. So those are the only 3 buildings that have ever won a Governor General's Award in Ottawa. no shade to Peterborough. Peterborough is a lovely town, but Peterborough has won 5 Governor General's Awards in architecture. That's almost twice as many as Ottawa. Um, and then you go to a place like Edmonton. Edmonton has won 9 Governor General's Awards in architecture, 3 times as many as Ottawa. Most of them are for municipal buildings, and nearly half of their awards have been in just the last few years. That includes ordinary municipal buildings like a stormwater treatment plant, a park pavilion, and a chemical-free outdoor swimming pool. So Edmonton has made it a priority to not only create outdoor swimming pools, but leading edge chemical-free outdoor swimming pools in a place like Edmonton that gets as much winter as Ottawa. And they don't just make them, they make them so phenomenally good that they win a Governor General's Award. And as part of that, it attracts international attention to the quality of the environment that attracts tourism, investment, and it improves the quality of life for residents. All of these things are benefits to the city of Edmonton as a side benefit to investing in good places for people. Publicly funded architecture that's deemed to be excellent and stand the test of time and recognized as tomorrow's heritage is unfortunately few and far between in Ottawa. Less than 2% of the provincial design awards are granted to Ottawa buildings, while that very same type of community building is routinely wins awards in other cities. The last community center that won an award in Ottawa was nearly 30 years ago, and the last municipally funded building was awarded in 2012 on a project planned years before the so-called austerity budget became the norm. So why is it that built form in Ottawa, especially at the municipal level, doesn't generate awards? Meanwhile, that same type of building receives all kinds of awards, regularly and routinely in other towns and other cities. This isn't about design talent because there's plenty of talented firms doing really incredible work that are based right here in Ottawa. My own firm, for example, does leading climate responsive, socially progressive, lasting, and cherished work across the country. Most of us who practice just don't practice here. So why not? Well, those of you who've heard me speak about in the past about procurement and the process of hiring architects and engineers will have guessed the answer. And I'm not here tonight to talk about procurement, so sorry to disappoint those who are here for that. But yes, that procurement process is a miserable part of the process, but it's more driven by a vision to create lasting places that stand the test of time. It's about what we prioritize. And when I say our priorities, I mean our municipal government's vision for excellence, for quality, for the kind of enduring, lasting kind of place that we need to be the kind of city we aspire to be. To stop saying that good enough is good enough, but to continually pursue excellence. A big part of our success, and of course our consternation in building, is that we start a project with limited vision and limited scope. And that's often determined by a budget that can't achieve the goals that are set. Things like meet the minimum building code, meet the minimum accessibility, drive an approach to do the very least. And that's then set aside in favor of doing the right thing, which then sends costs through the roof and delays projects for years and causes endless hand-wringing. No one ever really expected the Central Library to be a $193 million project. Those of us who looked at the project in its early days and looked at the RFP, we all knew this was a $300 to $400 million project. Yet the 993 is what gets voted for and approved. We vote and approve $63 million for a community center, and then we're going to act surprised when the costs skyrocket and then punish the design team. We chose to delay work in the Byward Market because of a failed election promise, and now it's going to cost nearly double what we planned, but that doesn't make the news. You know, we keep talking about a $200 million investment, but that $200 million investment was planned in 2020 when the report was passed. No one's talking about the cost of, escalation in cost of construction that have nearly doubled the cost of that. So we don't talk about those things because we're not planning and thinking properly. We're not thinking about the future. We could, of course, say, well, $200 million is it, $193 million is it. That's all we're spending. But we have to wonder if that's going to give us the kind of enduring, lasting quality of space that meets public needs, and if that's going to last for 200 years. Nothing exemplifies that more than the William Commanda Bridge. I've had endless discussions with many councillors about this. It is fine. It is good. It is you could even say that it's great. It is absolutely better than nothing. And it is definitely better than before. That's absolutely an agreement. But better than nothing is a pretty low bar. We spent $22 million on this bridge. We sole sourced the design to a civil engineering firm on the city's standing offer. There was no open discussion on how to make the bridge a people place. There was no design public process. There was no public input or design competition. The bridge is closed for half the year because we can't be bothered to think of active transportation in winter. We didn't even meet our own accessibility standards because it was too hard, and we didn't hire anyone who's an expert in accessibility. There are no lookout points on the bridge to enjoy the best views of the city. There's a couple of signs to warn you not to jump in the water, but the guardrails we built make it actually easier to climb the bridge and jump in. There's no emergency beacons to summon help. It's very much a sort of meet the minimum kind of approach. The embankments on the land portions rely on an expectation of perfection so that no one on a bike might wobble a little bit or lose their way, or if you're biking with your kids and they're small and they kind of don't really know what they're doing and they kind of wander off the path, well, boop, they're gone down that embankment into the bushes. The code minimum piece of concrete that sits there as a place to sit in a wheelchair or a scooter relies on perfection that you don't accidentally miss and roll off the embankment and then boom, you're in the bushes and you can't get out. We put up a couple of garbage cans, but we don't empty them, so trash ends up all over the landscape. There's no art, there's no information to tell you about William Commanda. That's a separate project that's happening 3 years after the bridge opened. There's nothing to discuss our industrial heritage, the role of William Commanda in our city. We don't talk about anything other than that we plunk down some benches and we didn't even put the benches in a place where there's a good view. So then we did it again. We created this new bridge at Carleton University. We closed it for the winter, just when most students would want to use it. And honestly, frankly, no apologies to the engineers who designed it, but it is ugly as hell. It's the most boring and uninspired attempt to make a bridge possible. It gives no context to its setting. After some political pushback, it was kept open. So, that's good, but it's still ugly. We're stuck with this bridge until it falls apart, which is really unfortunate because it's probably going to last a really long time. And we're stuck with kind of boring, mediocre, and ugly for a really long time. And, in the case of the William Commanda Bridge and also the Alexandra Bridge and otherwise, I haven't talked about Alexandra because that's a federal bridge. The William Commanda Bridge is ours. It's our municipal property. It could have been so much more. It could have been our version of the High Line in New York. It could have been a year-round exploration of our industrial history. It could have been a real act of reconciliation, a place for public art. It could have been instantly the most Instagrammable place in the city. What we have is an attitude of close enough is better than nothing. And that attitude sits amidst fears from councillors that if we push for better, we won't get anything built, which is unfortunate. We choose to budget for roads and more roads. And we choose, that this is what we're going to build and it's going to last. And that heritage, we have to ask in 2226, are we going to look back on 400 years of history and say, yes, that road is part of our culture? Will we regret that we spent so much on roads and so little on housing or other buildings? And that comes down to design leadership. We don't really have anyone with a design background in positions of authority that guide council and budgetary planning on long-term design value. We don't have any politician who's willing to stand up and follow Edmonton's Mayor Mandel 2005 declaration that we are done with crap and ready to enact policy on challenging that norm in the public interest. We don't build a culture of design appreciation and a willingness for beauty. And it's more than having a vision. It's about encoding that vision in policy and in practice. So when challenged about projects where the winning firms are known to legally exploit their staff with unpaid labor through employment standards exemptions, those in charge of scoring the project and awarding the contract look through the screen and they say they don't care if it's not illegal. In proposing design competitions, I skipped a slide. In proposing design competitions to engage the public and build consensus, to create ideas and to generate support for a project, those in charge say, no, design competitions don't work. The public gets too excited about something that they can't have or they can't afford, without recognizing that maybe the reason the public gets excited about something and then we can't have it is because the vision to implement a vision and an idea and what the public wants, what we, the public, are paying for, is driven by a budget that doesn't suit the needs of the public. Ottawa's transit system is a really good example of this. Mass transit in cities like London that opened in 1863 or New York in 1904, these are still operating today. How many of us honestly believe that Ottawa's light rail will still be running in 50 years, let alone 100 or 200 years? Have we planned and invested for the future, or are we just operating on short-term thinking based on short-term success? Things like zoning bylaws and official plans, yes, absolutely they are important, but they are short-term tools that are reactive to land use planning requirements and political approval. They're subject to appeal and to change for the sake of private interest. They're bureaucratic devices that are used to define, manage, and control growth. And while they might contain some aspirational language, the implementation of these aspirations isn't necessarily there. If you think about it, the official plan came out in 2021. It was approved in 22, but it really needed the new zoning bylaw that was only approved this year to become really effective. And that official plan is due to be updated every 5 years and renewed entirely every 10. So it creates this sort of seemingly endless cycle of updates. What do we need beyond the zoning bylaws and official plans? We need a bold calls for action. The official plan calls out for some of these five goals with bold actions, but how do we measure up to them when looking at recent actions and direction? If we look at only one of these, goal 2, that the majority of trips be undertaken by sustainable transportation, does it make sense that if we want to improve sustainable transportation, that within 5 years of the official plan being published, we've seen transit fares continue to go up while service declines, parking remains free or cheap, and car dependence is embedded in our planning decisions and land use approvals? If we want people to walk and bike more, to use active transportation, why don't we maintain our bike network in winter? Why do we chain off stairs and bridges and make it harder for people to get around? If you look at that little thumbnail map in the corner, that's a map of our bicycle network near one of our national museums. How do we create active transportation and support people who want to get around other than by car if all we build are disconnected little pieces of bike lane, half of which we don't even maintain in the winter? A decade ago, Alain Miguelis talked about the plan that transformed Ottawa in the post-war years and gave us much of what we cherish today. This was a visionary, aspirational plan, and it set out the change that we are embracing today. The city that we love today is largely driven by the Grébert plan. But where is today's plan? Does the Grébert plan work? Who's going to author the next aspirational vision for the city? I certainly am not, but I wrote about it in 2022 for Policy Options Journal. We need a public process to help engage Ottawa residents in creating a vision for our city. To take one example, let's just look at trains. With the lens of 2020 hindsight, we can rethink the past. And sure, we can bemoan the fact that we don't have a downtown train station like Toronto because of the Grébert plan, but the trade-off is that we gained Colonel By Drive, we gained the recreational use of the canal, and we reclaimed the space that was consumed by rail yards downtown. The fact that the current train station is orphaned in a sea of largely unbuildable land, surrounded by highways and low-density retail and parking, that's a decision that we made as a city. We moved the train station, and then we didn't create the conditions for land around it to thrive because we lack the policy tools to achieve a vision we haven't even begun establishing. Now, today, 60 years after that train station opened, we're starting to see housing built around the periphery. But most of the land around that train station is decades away from ever being built or rebuilt, if anything can ever be built. There's a small section, tiny little section in blue across the highway that is currently the site of a rarely used baseball stadium and an awful lot of empty parking. That's a great opportunity to create a new community, a new space, but we lack the policy tools to create a vibrant, dynamic public design process to bring that into fruition. We just wring our hands about the future of baseball in the city, and we're not sure what we're going to do next with that stadium or its land. We don't really plan like we want the affordable and moderately dense walkable city we say we aspire to be, and that we set out in official plans and otherwise. Think about the eastern extension of the LRT. Most of the stations are located at highway off-ramps with little or no space for buses, as seen in the circle on the left. The majority of the land around the station, with the exception of the area circled in red, is either already built up with detached housing, for which land assembly and densification is a massive uphill battle, or any buildable land is located right at the station, where any residents living there in tall towers are subjected to the noise and pollution of living on a highway. The chance that we'll see meaningful density at the station is slim to zero. But if the LRT had run, like Waterloo's Ion LRT, along a main street like St. Joseph Boulevard, not only would that traditional main street have gotten new sewers and new water lines, which are, to be honest, probably already nearing end of life anyway, but it would have created the conditions to redevelop commercial land along the road. And that would have built mid-rise housing, mixed-use development along main streets, and improved the quality of life for residents, and brought an economic vitality to the community to create the sort of walkable, moderately dense, thriving community we aspire to. In future years, in 100 years, in 200 years, how will we look back at our transit routing? Will we look at St. Joseph Boulevard and wonder what could have been different? Hindsight's always 2020, but we're making decisions today that have lasting generational impact, and we need to make better decisions that are in the public interest, not just because it's cheap because we own the right of way. What we need are better policy tools to link development, transit, climate change, land use, and design. These are from a national call for action for national policy, but they can just as easily apply to the city scale as well, especially at the granular level that city governments operate at. We can use design policy to help target how we build and what we build to look forward to what our future selves need to make Ottawa a thriving city. This isn't new, and this isn't rocket science. The Montreal 2030 agenda stated that design and architecture can help shape a city that is conducive to health and wellness for all, and that it can be a more socially equitable, pluralistic, and inclusive city that is more environmentally responsible, more economically efficient, and more culturally attractive and fulfilling, while being more resilient to climate change and crisis. That agenda asserts that design has an impact in making Montreal a better place. These are guidebooks available from Design Montreal that include case studies and best practices and approaches to design quality. There are other guidelines on how to deliver design competitions, as well as statistical information with economic data on the impact of design. There's a catalog to encourage investment in the city as a place of design culture, and that is 100% municipally driven. On top of that, since 1992, provincial law in Quebec has required that public design competitions must be held for all cultural facilities supported by municipalities and similar organizations if the concerned budget is over $2 million. That mandate has created a vibrant design culture with creative design approaches and a burgeoning culture of smaller firms who compete on the strength of their ideas, not on their fees and whether or not they pay their employees. Ottawa could choose to do this in a heartbeat. We don't need permission from Queen's Park. We don't need NCC approval or government approval. We can just choose to become a culture of design, to create beautiful places. That is our choice. If we're to achieve our vision of being Canada in one city, we should embrace the Massey Report from 1955, 52, 55, and the calls to action in that report to bring about a better awareness of our country, our history, and our transitions, to express pride in our city and our city as a G7 capital. And we should support the work that the NCC does to make Ottawa beautiful and thriving. We should celebrate the richness of our existence in both rural and urban settings. What a better city in Canada could to do this that embodies so many rural and urban landscapes and that has the power and wealth of Ottawa to create that sort of legacy that our children's children's children can look back on with pride. So how do we achieve that? This isn't hard to imagine. If you talk to some of our municipal politicians, they'll say that we should absolutely be building for the future and we should be doing all of these things. There's a cohort of elected officials, however, who really want to do this only as long as taxes stay low and the election horizon is favorable. We need to shift that mindset. The conversation needs to be about how investing, not just spending, makes life better. And that a city architect isn't going to add layers of bureaucracy, but is actually going to reduce it to organize and bring coherence to a veritable hydra of existing conflicting policies and standards. And that our future selves will thank us for investing smartly, for building well and creating the city we aspire to be. We need to lead by design. Design impacts everything from policy to budget, and everything can be designed, from garbage cans to sidewalks to buildings and parks. We can design the outcome we want. We have to make design matter. This is an excerpt from the Canadian Law of Architecture and Engineering, third edition by Supreme Court Justice Beverly McLaughlin and Arthur Grant, published in 2020. The highlighted part is sort of a mantra that I keep on my phone with me all the time, that architects and engineers operate as independent practitioners providing services and are not subject to detailed control by those whom they served. But the reality is that when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, the result of what we see in public places and roads and parks and otherwise is being commissioned and controlled and contracted by those who have little or no vested interest in the outcome, who have no skills in the legal or regulatory environment that professionals operate in, and yet they control the outcome. They control the legal structure and the financial planning that encourages us to do our best, but limits us to do what they think is necessary. That's a recipe for conflict. It's not a recipe for success. We need to develop municipal design policy that focuses on people, on places, and the potential within us. We need to harness the power of federal research institutes, the R&D facilities at schools of architecture and engineering, to realize the potential of our national capital region. For example, the German Baukultur Foundation aims to raise public awareness of building culture, to enhance debates between building professionals regarding the quality of their buildings, and to promote local building culture internationally. The Wallonia-Brussels Federation has three aims, and they include guaranteeing the quality of buildings and spaces to make them accessible to the public, as well as supporting the integration of works of art in public buildings and architecture as a cultural discipline. Ireland, meanwhile, has a state architect within the Office of Public Works that leads a team of architects to ensure the quality of housing stock, to supervise and protect the conservation of heritage, and to maintain a database of conservation and maintenance needs, and to manage the awarding of contracts for architectural services while consulting and coordinating with other government bodies. So these are all national policies, but there's no reason that we can't use the best pieces of these to create our own municipal design policy similar to Montreal. And as a nation's capital, as the capital of a G7 country, we can do that and build that policy and show how that policy relates to and supports the work our federal partners do. We need to focus on the prosperity that is achieved by investing in public housing, in public buildings and landscapes. Remember 2017 when we celebrated the sesquicentennial and the Byward market was closed to cars for a few precious days? The market thrived. It was filled with people, with art, with entertainment. Memories were created for thousands. Probably millions of photos were shared, showing the market at its very best as a place for people. It was so popular, restaurants ran out of food. What stops us from doing that all the time? We went right back to a market filled with cars and parking. And the new study that's been released, the new plan that's to be implemented, it largely ignored public input. And it's still a tiny fraction of the market is pedestrianized. We need to see the potential that exists in creating better places for people. And we need to see prosperity as more than just parking and profit, but prosperity as a social good, as ways to thrive and to live with joy. We need to invest in housing and housing affordability. These are some images of housing being built by Ottawa Community Housing in recent years, and some of them are spectacular and they're great. They're fantastic places to test ideas and to create lasting quality and improve lives. We also look at places like new parks, like the Eugène Martineau Park in Wateridge Village. These are great parks, but if you go to these new parks, there's not a single washroom. So we can spend tens of millions of dollars on parks and playgrounds, but we don't give a place to use a bathroom. And anyone who's got little kids or little grandkids, you take them to the park, 10 minutes after you get there, someone's got to pee, and then you have to pack up and go home because there's not a bathroom in sight. Why don't we launch parks with public washrooms like the Tokyo Toilet Project, as seen on the right, designed by Nao Tamura? These can bring whimsy and art to a functional and necessary public service. We need public washrooms to be built. We need places that are interesting. Boring places are a matter of public health. A recent talk by Dr. Colin Ellard, as well as leading research and work by Dr. Robin Mazunder, who are both neuroscientists, and they're interested in the impact of the built environment on our health and our well-being. And it shows that how cities are designed affects our health. We need to make better places that help us thrive and prosper because they make us happier. We need to adopt far-reaching objectives of seeing how every project and decision is measured against a long-term goal to create better places with better outcomes. Buildings are enormous sources of greenhouse gas emissions, yet we typically design for code minimum. Our existing public buildings have received billions of dollars in investment in built form, but they need deep energy retrofits and they need long-term value investment to become resilient and climate responsive so that they last for the future. Our current new buildings target such absurdly low standards because we put off the real cost to some future self. Within the next 200 years, that future self will regret that we didn't make smarter decisions today. This is the City Hall with the historic drill hall in the background. We hired one of Canada's most talented architects, Raymond Moriyama, rest in peace, to design this beautiful building. It opened in 1990 as what was then the headquarters of the regional municipality. Later on, we added the Rink of Dreams to promote skating at Marion Dewar Park. And this is all excellent. But what's that slapped on the front? It's the most awful shed for a Zamboni. It's absolutely hideous. We need to do better. We need to take pride in our places. Like Guelph, we could have created a structure that provides seating. Yes, it stores a Zamboni, but it also has a washroom, and it becomes a positive, engaging space instead of inaccessible construction trailers, a bunch of cones, and a wart of a shed glommed onto the side of a beautiful building. It's not like we don't have precedent and examples of how to do this. We just need to want to. We need to dream big. We need to dream of better places. And I know that this ship has sailed, but I just can't help sharing it. Imagine if Lansdowne Park had been developed with a Parisian-style density of streets. Imagine if we had preserved the existing STEM seating, invested in greenhouse gas reductions, invested in making it accessible, invested in maintaining it over the years, if we had kept the public parks, and even if we kept the existing buildings on Bank Street, and took the rest of the site and redeveloped it with Parisian-style streets and density, we'd have far more housing. We'd have walkable neighborhoods. We'd have small businesses that are promoted and supported by the thousands of homes that are nearby. We need to dream bigger. If you haven't read Napoleon III and the Rebuilding of Paris, it's out of print, hard to find, but if you find a copy, it's absolutely fascinating reading. And I'm not saying that we need, the corruption and nepotism that were prevalent in the time of Napoleon III, but that rebuilding of Paris gave us the city that we love today. We don't need the sort of, quasi dictatorship of a Baron Haussmann to take over Ottawa, but how can we imagine the kind of Ottawa of tomorrow that's as good as the city of Paris today? How can we create vibrant places to create the culture, the well-being, and prosperous place that we all know Ottawa can be? We have the tools, we have the ability, we have the capacity. We just need to make it happen. We need to make design matter. Thank you.
That is wonderful, Tom. Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I know that all our audience members also enjoyed listening to your talk. You started off with the question of poor self-image, how cheap we are, the dependent on the federal government. You noted procedural fetish, and of course the low design expectations that we are now feeling. But I think your talk was mostly about city building, right? It was about city building and a design first program. And in fact, many of the things that I think you're speaking to the converted already, because I think everyone was thinking, oh, why don't we have a chief architect? Why don't we have an architecture first program and the rest of it? You even touched on the missing middle, which is always an irony because it's self-defeating to say missing middle because it's always going to be missing. We don't even have that. So I liked your comments on design first policies. Obviously, we've know quite a few cities have put forward those. Brussels has, the Antwerp has, Copenhagen has too. You'd like that to be adopted here. So we have a few questions in the chat already. I'd like to be selfish and ask you, first of all, what are the political conditions to resolve this situation that you've commented on? How do we take that in our democracy and transform the city then?
That's a tough one. I'm no politician, but I think part of it is that we've politicized some of the decision making. So projects might go through years of planning approval and sort of that sort of day-to-day, stuff, and then they get to council, and council says, "Well, we're going to take 3 stories off the top of the building." And suddenly, the building doesn't work anymore, or you have to change something. So we've got this sort of there's this political lens that we put political stuff on top of, make those decisions in the built environment politicized. But at the same time, we don't have anybody at council who is advising council on the ramifications of those decisions. We have a city manager, we have a city engineer, in various forms, who sit near the council table and will provide advice. But we don't have anybody from a design perspective doing that. And I think maybe that's a piece that's missing. And I think sort of broadly as well, there's not a full understanding of the impact architecture has on city decisions. Architecture drives 17% of Ontario's GDP, and if more politicians understood that, then understood the economic impact of procurement policies and that kind of thing, it would have a different impact on how we make decisions.
That's wonderful. Okay, thank you. I'd like to invite, to make sure that everyone participates, to pose questions of our speaker. As Catherine mentioned, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And of course, I'm going to moderate it. Now, during the presentation, there were already questions coming in. I've summarized them for you, but I'd like to ask you some of them. So for instance, what places are missing from the narrative or identity of Ottawa? And one of the audience members gave the example of the Igor Guzenko apartment building on Somerset.
There is an awful lot of really lovely architecture in Ottawa that doesn't make it on tours, or doesn't make the guidebooks. There's a handful of folks. There was a guy who used to be on Twitter back in the Twitter days, Chris something, and I think he had a book of like low-rise apartment buildings of Centertown or something, which is probably one of the most niche publications ever. Um, there is an awful lot of really lovely, good, functional, okay, maybe it's not going to win a gold medal anywhere, but just beautifully detailed, well thoughtfully planned buildings that exist and that crop up on tours every now and then. Sarah Gelpart does a tour for Heritage Ottawa on brutalism. I think there are sometimes tours of Centertown. I think the book that you and Peter wrote included tours of Centertown. So there are a lot of these sort of really great little buildings that should be more well known and thoughtfully considered as part of like walking tours. I know that's something the Ottawa Architecture Foundation is developing with some
Mhm.
help from you and others. So I think that there's a lot that should be recognized and thoughtfully considered when thinking about new buildings.
Um, Other questions that are coming in. Are we losing top talent at the city? This is anecdotal, but one audience member asked, why did we lose? Why do we keep losing people from the city? And they go to other places, and so we don't have that talent. You want to comment on that?
Um, No, I don't really know how to comment on that. I mean,
Yeah.
the challenge in the city is that, I knew someone who used to work for the city, and he said he was in planning, and he said that when he used to do lectures to planning students, he would say, if you want to plan, if you want to be a planner, go work in private practice. If you want to move
Mm.
paper around, go work for government. Because it's hard to do the thing that you're trained in is in talent within the city bureaucracy. There are challenges to doing that. I think that part of the challenge in talent retention is sort of the churn that comes in. And we don't make it necessarily easier. We, say to people, well, you got to be back in office 5 days a week, and you can do your job, working from home just as well. So we force people out in some respects, and those are, political decisions. Um, but I'd almost say that it's not so much that we need top talent within the city, is that we need to be hiring top talent to design projects and to be running projects, not just within the city, but within, city agencies and organizations, OC Transpo, Auto Community Housing. All of these organizations need to be hiring top talent.
Um, Another interesting question I think would be great to get your perspective on. This is a question that came in, and it's about could the Mackenzie King Bridge, I think this was actually quite creative, be repurposed as Ottawa's High Line? Obviously, they're working on it right now, so and it'll be a transportation corridor. But let's get your opinion on that.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. The Mackenzie King Bridge. Yes, I suppose it could. I think it would be challenging because it's really been designed as a highway. I'd really see the Alexandra Bridge being the real opportunity for that.
Mhm.
The federal government is going to dynamite it with no climate change impact and destroy a heritage building to dump more cars in the market. It's completely absurd. But I think that the Alexandra Bridge is probably a better contender for that. The challenge, I think, to the Mackenzie King Bridge and to a certain extent Portage as well, is that they're quote unquote modern bridges built with modern materials, and I think they're actually going to have a shorter shelf
Shelf
life
life.
than things like the William Commander or Alexandra Bridge.
Um, Another one, just to summarize for you. What are the consequences? I think I'm getting the sense of the question right here. What are the consequences of what happened to Ottawa many years ago when Mike Harris amalgamated the city? Has this caused political problems within the decision-making framework of the city?
Yeah, I think it definitely has. I think amalgamation hasn't really done us any favors. The things that would have benefited us were things we were doing already, like regional water, sewer, transit. Those things were kind of already covered through the RMOC. But the amalgamation has really made it tough for things to get done. You have disparate votes. The urban core, I've done some research on this. The inside the green belt is 13% of Ottawa's land, but is a little over half its property tax base and half its population. But it's a tiny fraction of the overall land. And so when things happen and things need to happen, or there's objections to things, like you saw the votes around Lansdowne, you see that kind of split, and unfortunately, they end up being sort of 16-9 vote splits, and that's really unfortunate because it creates a real tension between inside Greenbelt, outside Greenbelt, and rural as sort of three different kind of tenets. There was a discussion with some councillors a little while ago, and they were upset because, garbage was going to be trucked out to a dump, and they were tired of urban garbage being trucked through their ward. And I saw some comments on social media. People said, "Well, I'm tired of suburban residents being trucked through my neighborhood to get to work." Like, it goes both ways. So I think that amalgamation hasn't really helped. Um, I don't know exactly how it works, but Montreal's borough system seems to work a little bit better.
Mhm.
And maybe that's an alternative, and it's a way of restructuring certain committees, like planning committees on council, that if they could function in a better way, we would have better decision making.
Hmm. And there's a lot more counselors involved in the borough system. There's,
Mhm.
I think, upwards to 100 or so. Okay, there are some questions flowing in now. I'm going to try to summarize some of these. Let's go to one person is asking about you. You mentioned about Haussmannization in Paris. We all enjoy what happened to the city there as they transformed it from a medieval city to a Beaux-Arts city. Um, what about what about taking the inspiration from Ottawa's vernacular and its place and identity and roots, and how would you inform that vernacular with the design of our city?
Um, it's the tough discussion is always around context and building design. To say buildings need to be of their time, need to be contemporary, need to be of the time in which they are created.
Mm,
It leads to challenges. I mean, we all saw the debates about the addition to the Chateau Laurier. That addition was of its time, but really nobody liked it. There were aspects of it that I could understand, I could appreciate, but even I wasn't a particular fan of that. And so, how do you create something that's modern, that's new, while also trying to meet some of the other challenges? And I guess it depends on where that building is being located. If you're talking a new building on, for example, Block 2, the design competition for that's across from Parliament Hill. There are certain major, more federal design standards that should be met because they're reflecting that federal character. But if we're talking like an infill building on Kirkwood Avenue, does it need to meet that sort of Ottawa aesthetic or Ottawa standard and be informed, or should it be informed by the context of the neighborhood that it's in? I guess when I think about some of the challenges of that, you know, how do you create something that is quote unquote Ottawa and distinctive and of its time that is still remaining to be affordable, sustainable, and meet current standards and designs. I mean, some of those Haussmann buildings are absolutely stunning, but they would be very, very difficult to replicate today, not just because we don't have, I mean, we have stonemasons, we have spectacular masons, but the cost of building something like that today would be so phenomenal that no one could afford to live there. So,
mhm,
we have to find that balance and I think create things that are um, respectful of the context of the city of Ottawa.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, there's real challenges there. We we
Mhm.
we can appreciate that. Um, what about the question of teaching, pedagogy, and how would students be able to be taught how to appreciate more critically the quality of our built environment, and how would they better engage their skills with city building design?
Well, some European countries have, as part of their national architecture policies, have included K-12 education in architecture, urbanism, and urban planning, design, as part of their K to 12 education. So kids get as much exposure to, architecture through their elementary and high school years as they get to, biology and chemistry and math and science. They get that exposure because it's seen as part of culture. And so they graduate with a sense of at least an understanding of the built environment. A friend of mine is a university architecture prof and said that, when kids come to school and they show up in first year and they go to biology class, it's because they hold up their hand and they say, well, I like dissecting frogs or I liked plants. And they go to engineering school because, well, I like bridges and I like Lego. And they go to architecture school and they say, well, I downloaded SketchUp and I played with it on a weekend, or I played with Lego as a kid. And that's kind of as far as it goes because kids don't get that exposure. So I think embedding architecture in K to 12, teaching them about architecture, how design works, and not just architecture, but sort of all aspects of design. How does a doorknob work? Why is a lever doorknob shaped the way it is? Understanding industrial design. I think these are really fascinating ways of teaching that. And there are some limited programs that do that. There's a program that operates out of, I think it's Hamilton, and I think Prince Edward County, called Imagine My Sustainable City. And they do sort of week-long workshops through the Ottawa Foundation, Architecture Foundation. We're trying to bring them up to Ottawa for summer camps to get kids understanding urbanism and sustainability. So, there are ways to do that, but it needs to be a sort of a bigger, more programmatic pedagogy that's brought in at a ministry level to really make it effective.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's amazing that a country doesn't even teach any of this, let alone design heritage at a young age. And yet it's fully surrounding everyone as they
Yeah.
as they live in the world. So it's pretty amazing we ignore it. Um, there's a question about zoning. What are your impressions on it? I won't read the full question, but there's the new official plan, the OP. What about uh, this idea of zoning that's been around for 100 and
Um,
some odd years?
well, I'm a little bit of a fan of keeping it simple. I think zoning, as it's typically written, is far too complex. There's um, far too many, little pieces, adjustments. There's no one size fits all. And you can have a zoning bylaw that meets the intent, or you can have a project that meets the intent of the bylaw, but falls apart because, there's one little thing that's slightly off because there's an interpretation that's different. And so I think it becomes very bureaucratic and very mired in that kind of complexity. So I don't want to just say, well, to hell with it, throw out all zoning, we'll just do what we want, because that also doesn't work. I don't think. So I have hope for the new zoning bylaw that it's going to be more effective, more useful. But I think its challenge is that, unless it has unless there's good discretion in how it's used, when it's used like a sledgehammer, and well, you're 1/10 of a centimeter over the lot line because your brick overhangs. Like, oh God, we have to see the forest for the trees. And I think we need more discretion in how zoning bylaws are used to better understand that, for example, like if you have a doggy daycare and you have a doggy daycare and the dogs go to sleep and they stay overnight, well, that doesn't automatically make it a kennel that has to be 200 meters away from any residential property. So, that's the sort of sledgehammer approach that is embedded in zoning bylaws. So I think we need to have more thoughtfulness on discretion and sort of form-based. What's the intent behind things?
Okay, there's a few more questions here and some comments and so on. You can look at those afterwards, but I think I'll finish off with one last sort of question here that could provoke some interesting response from you, and that is about our counselors. Is there a sense of fear culture and unwillingness to risk, and how do you build that into to not just having good enough design, but something much more uh, inspirational, like many other placemaking projects around the world.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, counselors are not in an easy position. They get reelected every 4 years. They're always trying to watch out that they don't, approve something in one neighborhood that ends up being their downfall for reelection 2 years later. That's it's a tough position to be in, and that's why I almost feel like these things need to be depoliticized, because and at the same time, we need politicians who have courage. And I'm not saying that politicians are cowards, but we need to have politicians who have the courage to stand up and make bold decisions, like Edmonton's mayor did in 2005.
Mm.
To put their foot down and say no. Like, I want good things. I want good places, and here's why. And have that kind of really clear, cogent conversation about the quality and why it matters. I remember when I was talking with Carl Belanger in Edmonton a few years ago. He said something about how at one election somebody was running for council in Edmonton and their whole election platform was based around the idea. They said, look, we're spending way too much money on community buildings. Vote for me and I'll save you all kinds of money. And the guy lost by a massive landslide because everybody really liked the really good quality buildings. And that's the thing, is that what's being built in Edmonton, whether it wins awards or not, they're building just really good places. They open the door and boom, people are using them. People love them. They're well designed. They're thoughtful, and not everything is to everybody's taste. I mean, people, every time I mention Edmonton, somebody brings up the Edmonton Library. Okay, well, not everything is to everybody's taste. It doesn't always work, but they're great projects. Fire stations, community centers. There's just such great little buildings, and they're just doing a phenomenal job, and people love them. And the thing is that they're not paying anything more for them. They're paying what we should be paying for buildings. They're budgeted, they're being planned properly, they're being planned thoughtfully, and people love them. Nobody, no, I was talking with someone from the NCC, and they said nobody goes to the River House and says, "Oh my God, what did we spend on this?" They go to the River House and they say, "Oh God, this thing is so fantastic. I love it. It's so great." Nobody's questioning whether or not we spent our money poorly. They're loving the fact that it's there. Where we question if it's poor is if we go to a place and go, we spent $50 million on this and this is all we got. That's the conversation that happens. We need to be prepared to walk into a space and say, wow, we got this for
Mm.
$60 million. Wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. What a great space this is.
Um, yeah, it definitely commenting on the River House. I mean, it is interesting. The NCC had that 50-year capital plan, and they're delivering on those capital projects.
Hmm.
Um, um, and then on the other hand, you showed the slide of the Ottawa City Hall with its temporary Zamboni box, no design involved, and yet even the barriers to getting into the city hall itself, or the former regional center, is such a great building, and
Hmm.
yet now they have massive amounts of security, more security than anyone would go into any, especially the mall or anywhere else. But you
Hmm.
can't even get into city hall through unless it's through security. So with that, Toon Dreessen, so city building, design first policies, being realistic, cherishing our places. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was wonderful to listen to. We're now going to wrap things up. And if you do have additional questions, they're all recorded, so your questions are there for Toon to look at. If you have additional questions, please email them to Heritage Ottawa at info@heritageottawa.org, and we'll share them with Toon. So once again, I'd like to thank him for his excellent presentation. Now, turning to future lectures. On April 22nd, Heritage Ottawa will present an in-person French language lecture at the Peter D. Clark Orleans Center, and it's on the golden age of spas, Caledonia and Carlsbad Springs. Fun fact is that Carlsbad Springs once was known as Cathartic. With noted local historian Michel Prévost, who will present his remarkable collection of artifacts collected over the past decades. This event will be free and it'll be open to all, but please register via our website at heritageottawa.org. And finally, as mentioned at the beginning, Heritage Ottawa lectures are provided free of charge. We encourage you to join Heritage Ottawa. And if you are not yet a member, and to donate to the organization to help continue efforts to share heritage stories. Information is available on the Heritage Ottawa website. And that brings us to the end of another evening lecture. So thank you for joining us. Stay well, be engaged, and have a good evening from all of us here at Heritage Ottawa.